All right, so we are in week 1. Tonight what we're going to do is in 2 parts. First, we're going to do a little bit of introduction to True Insight parenting strategies, specifically the trauma-informed parenting component to this. Some of you I recognize, so you've done the tips thing before and you've done some of the parenting thing. This is going to take all of that a little step further. So for those of you who are parenting kids who have experienced trauma in any ways, you're going to get some great wisdom here, and you're going to get some great insights, I really hope. Because that's what this was absolutely geared for, is for those people parenting kids who have experienced trauma. Now the great news is this works great for our birth kids as well. So if you're out there and you're thinking, hey, I'm not a foster parent, am I in the right place? Yeah, you're in the right place, because these strategies will absolutely work well for your birth kids as well. And we're going to kind of come to some new understandings as well about the nature of trauma and how pervasive it is in our culture. You know, there's studies that show that 2 out of 3 people walking around in our country right now have experienced at least one form of trauma. So it may not be your kids, but it may be you. And it may not be you or your kids, but more than likely it's your neighbors or your kids' friends from school. So gaining some sensitivity to the world of trauma and how it impacts everyone and how it impacts parenting and our kids is, I think, a great resource to everyone. So we're going to look at just kind of the basic philosophy of what this is all about. And then the second part of tonight is really going to look into this idea of adult attachment styles. How we do relationship and where that came from. We're going to do some self-work tonight. We're going to look into how you learned how to do this parenting thing. Starting not right now and not when you became a parent, but back to when you were parented. And some of those ideas that started way back then. And some of the things that we kind of push to the back of our minds sometimes. And we're going to really dig in a little bit tonight and be aware of some of those and see how those things might be impacting our ideas and our beliefs and our attitudes about parenting right now. But before we do all that, I'm going to introduce an activity we're going to do every single week. We're going to do a parenting mindfulness activity. So if you turn to page 4 in your workbook, you can kind of follow along with this. These are meant to kind of get us in a good space. Now I get that all of you have probably just dropped your kids off in childcare or else have them in babysitting somewhere else, and I get that that's a tough transition. And you might be miles away right now. You might be back to that 3rd meltdown that you had earlier today. And it's hard to learn when we're in that elevated state. The brain takes in information best when you're calm and regulated. We learn best when our minds are in that calm and regulated state. So whatever's happened today, we're going to see if we can get a little bit more peace, a little bit more space in our minds and in our brains to be able to take in this information tonight. You ready? Here's how it works. So what we're going to do is first I want you to think about something stressful that's happened today. Just one. Could be 5 minutes ago. Could have been earlier today. Something that just kind of elevated your emotions, heightened your arousal, your sensitivity. And I want you to just kind of notice how you feel as you bring up that memory. Do you notice anything in your body? Notice any tension, any unusual feeling? Notice any thoughts? Maybe some of those shame thoughts or those negative thoughts that tend to pop in. And I kind of want you to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 right now in your mind how stressful that memory feels to you right now. How distressed do you feel just bringing up that memory? Everyone got a number? 1 to 10. 10 meaning the most distressed you ever felt. 1 meaning I'm just fine. How distressed do you feel just bringing up that memory? Got it? Okay. Now what I want you to do is everyone's going to make our butterfly. Right? We're going to get your hands and you're going to pass them right in front of each other and grab thumbs. And we're going to make our butterfly. You got that? Great. Now our butterfly is gonna come down and land right over our hearts. Okay? I know it's silly, it's fun, it's playful, and it's something you can teach to your kids. So now the butterfly, what it's gonna do is it's gonna flap its wings left, right, pretty steadily. All right? In just a minute, we're gonna give it a start and just tap along with me. Ready? Here we go. Go. Keep going. Now, if you feel comfortable, I want you to close your eyes or not. Either way, take a few big, deep breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. Keep tapping. Take one more big, deep, cleansing breath. And stop. And let your attention kind of come back into the room. How do you feel? You feel better? Now rate that distress right now again on that scale of 1 to 10. How distressed do you feel right now? Did anyone notice their distress go down? Great. Good deal. Good deal. This is something you can continue to try. What this is bilateral stimulation. This is actually stimulating the right and the left hemispheres of the brain alternatively. We're going to learn in a few weeks what all that means. The right hemisphere is where feeling lives. The left hemisphere is where thinking lives. And we're going to kind of go back and forth. We're crossing the midline in our brain, getting more connectivity between those two parts of our brain. And something about tapping on other sides of the body it can be really relaxing and really soothing for some people. So if it worked for you, awesome. If not, we've got a lot more things that we'll try in the weeks to come. All of these that we're going to try too are things that I'd love for you to try with your kids too. If you notice your kid feeling really distressed, feeling upset, and you don't have anything to do, try the butterfly hug. It's playful, it's easy to remember, and it's something you can do. Wonderful. All right, so right into, everyone's brains are nice and relaxed, ready to learn, into our introduction about trauma-informed parenting. So this is not necessarily going to be just the basics of parenting, because most of you already know all of those, right? Basics like this: how to buckle up your baby in the car seat, bonding with baby, making baby smile. For all you dads out there, here's this one: exercising your baby. Or testing the baby bottle. The do's and don'ts. It's basic stuff, right? We're going to go beyond the basics in our class together over the next 8 weeks. What you'll see here are a wealth of resources. The things that I'm teaching are not just Corey's ideas or CAFA's ideas. A lot of things that we're talking about are the best and brightest of what child experts are talking about right now. People in the field of child psychiatry, people in the field of trauma, people in the field of interpersonal neurobiology, people who are working on problem-solving strategies that are research-based and have been proven to work really, really well, specifically with kids who experience trauma. So I've got links to all of these on the website, thetrueinsightparent.com. So if you're interested in any of the resources, they're all listed. Most of these people who have written the books also have companion websites. Those are all listed on the TIPS website as well. In addition, all of the videos that I'll be showing through the course of our time together, those are all cataloged in the TIPS website as well. So if you want to go back and watch one of those videos again or tag it and send it to a friend, that's where you can find all of those videos, all of those resources. And this came from a foster parent. A foster parent that I know came up to me and said, "Corey, I wish there was one place where I could find all that information that you keep talking about. All those books, all of those trainings, all of those websites." So that's kind of what TIPS became out of the request of a foster parent to see if we could put all this together. So here's my paradigm, kind of my parable about doing parenting with trauma. My metaphor for parenting is thinking about it like learning to play Monopoly. You want to play Monopoly? Right? it's a great big board, right? Lots and lots of squares, lots and lots of rules. Do you remember the first time you ever played Monopoly? And it seemed like super overwhelming, and there's like, they have people that really know how to do it, and then you're just this newbie who's trying to figure it out. And I kind of feel like parenting is a lot like that, right? Where we start parenting and it's super overwhelming. It feels overwhelming, and there's a lot of rules, and there's a lot of strategies, and there's a lot of things to learn. But after a while, you kind of get the hang of it. And you kind of get down the rules, and you kind of get down how the game works, and then you start to build strategy, right? You know which squares to go for on the Monopoly board, and you know which places to block on the other people, and you're not just playing, you're strategizing. And you're kind of enjoying it a little more because you got the basics down, you got the skills down. I think about parenting like that. I remember when I brought my first child home from the hospital, feeling completely overwhelmed. Like, oh my goodness, do they realize that I really don't know that much about parenting, and they just entrusted me with this little infant, right? It's tough. But after a while, I start to get the hang of it, and I start to feel a little better. Then they hit this new developmental milestone, and it all gets blown out of the water. But we kind of start all over again, and I've got this confidence that's starting to build. And eventually I've got strategy, and I've got skill in my parenting. That's what the kiddo who you bring home day one from yourself, right? Who shares part of your genetics, shares your history, shares your story, and that you start an attachment relationship with from the very first hours of life. Parenting kids who've experienced trauma is a little bit more like this. You can see this game board here. Yeah, this is the Cones of Dunshire. This is, there's a lot going on here, isn't there? It's a little more complicated than the last board, isn't it? There's different rules, different strategies, and so we've got something to do here. If we're trying to play that old game, but we've got this brand new board game, if we just try to throw those same old rules on that game board, what's going to happen? No one's really going to be having much fun. Right? Because those old rules don't necessarily apply. This is a brand new game. Kids who don't share that half of your DNA, who maybe you didn't share those first hours of life with, who maybe grew up in a different place and definitely had at least one major life disruption, or else they wouldn't be in your home as foster kids or adoptive kids. So just by the nature of their life being different, this board game's going to look a whole lot different for these kids. So we can try to make them fit into those same old rules that we've known, or what can we do? We can learn the new rules. We can learn the new strategies. We can figure out what this trauma thing is actually about. And that, some of those rules that might have worked for us, it might have even worked for our birth kids, and some of those strategies, when a child has experienced complex trauma at the hand of their caregivers, it changes up how they respond even to our most simple directions, to us setting limits, to us trying to guide and direct what they're doing. So we can try to force it, or we can look at the new rules. So that's what we're going to be doing. But I get learning the new rules can be really hard. It's a shift in the brain. And I'm going to show you a video here real quick that's going to kind of illustrate a little bit what it means to learn new things. So I want you to think about this, embracing learning, new ways of working with kids, new ways of interacting with your foster kids, and the kind of the vulnerability and the difficulty that it takes to learn something new. So watch this.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go, the better. Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels, every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this. For instance, this guy, I offered him $200 just to ride this bike 10 feet across the stage. Everybody thought he could do it.
No, you didn't understand. You didn't understand. So, this way. Okay. All right, just a second. All right, so, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Wait. No, you have to keep your feet on. Dude, all right, here we go. Wait. Like, you gotta start rolling at least. Go. And go. Okay, wait. Keep your feet on the pedal. Go. Go right on. Just keep your feet on the pedals. Handles on. Yeah, come on. All right, one more time. Okay.
Once you have a rigid way of thinking in your head, sometimes you cannot change that, even if you want to. So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck. But at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut. Are you gonna give up?
No.
Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up, you got it. Did you see his brain get it? So in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult.
It's kind of funny to watch them fall down, right? So a few things from that video. One is our brain likes patterns. We get these deep grooves, and our brain is very efficient at learning things and letting it settle in. So learning something new can be really, really challenging, right? It can be super hard, and it is doable. It can be done. We can learn new ways to relate to our kids. However, it feels like riding a backwards bike sometimes. Some of the things I might present during these weeks might feel a little awkward at first, might feel a little bit counterintuitive, like it feels different, it feels wrong. And I would encourage you to keep an open mind to these things. See if there's new ways of doing things that may be different. And we can build new neural pathways in our brain no matter how old we are. Takes a little longer sometimes as we get older, but it's still doable. And the great news that I love from that is to see how plastic the minds of children are. That they still have a lot of neuroplasticity. So as we're learning and we're teaching new ways of living to our kids, they're going to be able to be a little more flexible. Now, trauma may impact that. There may be a lot of those deep grooves that you're going to have to work to rewire. But keep telling yourself it's doable, just takes time. It's doable, takes patience. It really is doable. So one of the first things I'd like to present in terms of shifting our bike in a different direction is thinking about this word. Now, as we've been doing these trainings all over, a lot of times this is like one of the number one questions people ask. What about discipline? What about discipline? How do we do discipline? And for all of you foster parents, you know that there's a lot of limitations as to what you can and can't do. And some of this is going to be shifting into a different way of steering our bicycle, right? So I was thinking about this word discipline, and I want you to do just a little thought experiment here. As you think of the word discipline, you don't have to say it out loud, but just think about what comes to mind as you think the word discipline. Structure, order. And how do we do that structure and order? A lot of times discipline, a lot of people think about like punishment, right? And do's and don'ts, rewards and consequences. And I started thinking about this word discipline and thinking about the roots of this word. And if what we really want for our children is discipline, I want to challenge you to shift the way the bike is turning and think about this word, discipleship. The root word from discipline is the same for disciple, right? And when I say the word discipleship, what comes to mind? Think about people who do discipleship well. When I say like disciple, there's like, a great teacher, someone that is worthy of following, and there's people who are following them, right? There's someone who has the answers, someone who has the idea of how to do things well, and you have people who identify that that's the person that they want to follow. People who do this discipleship thing really well, I kind of thought about what goes into it. And one is that they're good at teaching, right? People who are good at making disciples are very, very good at teaching. The other thing is that they're really good at relationships. So as we're thinking about discipline, I want to challenge you to think about discipline as a form of discipleship. That you're the one that your little ones are following. How much of your discipline do you spend focusing on teaching, on guiding, on directing? You've got the answers that they need. And how much of your discipline do you spend on building strong attachments and relationships? Now you put those two things together and you've got some really powerful stuff happening there. You've got people who are leading and people who are following. So think about discipline in forms of discipleship. Then we have this foundational principle at TIPS, and I kind of translated it a little bit for the trauma-informed part of it with a little bit different language. And this is kind of our foundational principle through the lens of trauma. So our principle is be careful not to unintentionally frustrate people who have had a hard life. Being overly hard on them can make things worse. Treat them with empathy, kindness, and compassion. As you guide them with security and healthy living. Does that make sense? Kids who've had a hard life, they need a little bit more sometimes. And sometimes those old monopoly rules, those old parenting strategies, when applied to a kid who has experienced trauma, may be out of sync. And it's not an intentional thing. We are all doing the best that we can. But learning new ways of doing things can be helpful. So this is one of the foundational principles as well, is that kids are doing as well as they can. Most kids, most of the time, given the circumstances, are doing the best that they can. Now, our kiddos who have had life disruptions, who have had trauma, they may have missed out on learning some really important skills. They may have learned some of the wrong ways to do things. They may have learned by example that things maybe are easy this way and hard this way. It takes some understanding and this place of compassion that says, I believe they're doing the best they can. If they had the skills to be doing better, they would be doing it by now. The cool thing is this applies to us as parents as well. I want you to cut yourself some slack, right? We're all doing the best we can. And we can always learn new things. So our kids who are doing the best they can and aren't doing so great, the good news is that we don't end just with, oh well, that's life. We end with kids are doing the best they can and they can learn new things. Same's true for us. We're doing the best we can as parents and we can always learn new things. Understanding the child's world helps. If you understand not just what's happened in their history, not just what's in their DHS report, not just what's in their counselor's files, but really understanding their world, getting to know what's going on for them on a day-to-day basis is going to help you be able to figure out why some of those things aren't going so well. So I'm going to encourage you to really work at looking at the world through the eyes of your child. Super important. Now, the other part of this is understanding yourself is also vital. It's really important. In this parenting relationship, you've got a child that's half of the relationship, and you've got the parent who's the other half. So getting to know who you are, what stresses you out, what are your triggers, what is your history, understanding that will help you as you seek this discipleship relationship with your child. As you're seeking to teach and train and build relationship, you've got to pay attention to yourself as well, which we'll get into in the next half of the class. So I have a few pillars that are part of this tips parenting as well. We're going to base all these teachings on these ideas of humility, empathy, and generosity. So I want to encourage you to take on that mantle of humility as parents. That being humble, you don't have to know all the right answers. You don't have to do everything right. Being someone who's humble and who's teachable is a great space to be as a parent, because really, isn't that what we want our kids to be as well? And if we're telling them, you better be humble, you better listen, right? And we're not kind of role modeling that and showing them, hey, this is what it looks like to be a person who is a lifelong learner, who's a person who might be able to learn some new skills. We can do this. And being generous with our time, with our presence, with our energy, being generous with our kids. I'm not saying giving them lots of stuff. I'm saying giving them lots of you, your attention, your focus. It's foundational to this kind of parenting. And empathy, was what I mentioned before, is really just trying to see the world through the eyes of the child. So there's a phrase that Dr. Gary Landreth, that we'll talk about in a few weeks, says that I think really speaks well to humility. This is something I want you to take in and really start living. I love this phrase. What's important may not be what you do, but what you do after what you've done. Did you catch that? What's most important may not be that you get it right every time. What's most important may be that you can express humility, and you can own the things that you do wrong, and you can go back and make repairs in relationships. This is just foundational. You're setting the stage for your kids. You're showing them when things go badly, what do? We own what we've done, and we move back towards relationship. We move to fix the things that we may have broken. So there's also been some research done recently. It's a great study in 2016 that says humble people set others at ease. Right? So if you have a kid who tends to be high-strung, who tends to be triggered easily, being a person who just kind of permeates the idea of humility helps set others at ease. You've probably experienced this if you've had like a boss at work who's really humble, right? And they just kind of set the whole office atmosphere is like, hey, we're all learning here. We can all figure this out. We can figure out some things to do. So it sets other people at ease. Also, humble people are easier to be around. Surprise, surprise, right? And finally, people are more likely to receive instructions from those who are humble. So if we're wanting our kids to do what we ask them to do, being a parent who tries out this humility thing, we're more likely to get things done that we're asking them to do. So being humble. Generous, this promotes the idea that, number one, they're worth it. Our kids are worth our time and worth our focus and worth our attention. So when we put our phones down, or we turn off Netflix, or when we've had a hard day, but they've had a hard day and they need to just sit and be with us, and we take that time, that generosity of time, it lets them know they are valuable, they are worth it, and they are heard and they are seen in this universe, right? That someone is out there looking for them. And then when we take that time to be generous with them, and we're gonna look at some really great ways that we can do this, some practical ways to kind of live this out. But it also lets them know that being generous is a great virtue to have. If we want generous kids, we start with generous adults. And also the empathy, just really, especially when in conflict. This is where it gets tough. The empathy thing, I see how you see it. I see what's going on in your world, but then when things get hot, and when things get intense, and we get that kind of fight or flight going to empathy in those places where we recognize, wow, they're doing the best they can. It's not great right now, but they're doing the best that they can. Looking at what the world must look like to a kid whose life has been upended time after time after time, who didn't ask for any of this. Didn't ask to be removed, didn't ask for the trauma, didn't ask for any of those things. What does the world look like to a kid whose predictability has been blown out of the water? And whose idea of relationships has maybe been tainted in some really, really hard ways? What does that world look like? So when they're having that meltdown and having that tough spot, going to that place of empathy and training our brain, this is a backward spike move, right? Instead of going to what's wrong with you, go to what happened to you? This is Dr. Bruce Perry's words. He recommends that, especially when dealing with people who've experienced trauma, instead of the old way of looking at it as what's wrong with you, think about that. What happened to you? Why are things so tough? And I'm here to listen, and I'm here to learn. So our goals for all of us here over these next weeks are, one, that we increase our confidence as parents. So we maybe have a few more tools in our toolkit. Maybe have a few more ideas, a few more strategies to go to. I want you to feel confident as your parents. Your kids can pick up on it. Next week when we're talking about the brain and the nervous system, you're going to see just how much they can actually pick up, especially trauma kids, that they can pick up what's going on in your world. So we want parents who are confident. We also want you to feel competent. Confident, competent. You're confident in that you know what you're doing. You're competent, you've got the steps to do. And finally, what I hope for is that we increase all of our enjoyment of our children. It's a good goal? Yeah, we want to enjoy our kiddos more. So we're going to do that over the next 8 weeks, looking at some understanding ourselves that we're going to look at tonight, understanding others, looking at the world of the child, looking at child development, looking at the impacts of trauma on the developmental stages. And then we're also going to spend some time talking about problem solving, what happens when things go badly. What are some steps that we can take to help things get back on track, some step-by-step approaches to doing that, and also really how to promote connection through play and meaningful togetherness time. We're going to look at all of those things over the next 8 weeks. And one final one we're going to end with, it's a little different in this series, is we're going to look at grief and loss. Because parenting, especially foster parenting, is always going to mean grief and loss in one way or another. A kid comes to your home and they leave. It's loss. A kid comes to your home and they're grieving. And so we're going to look at some ways that we can understand the grief and loss process better and be a little more understanding towards ourselves and our kids. So for the rest of the night, we're going to look at attachment styles. So how your workbook works, there's some content that's in there. There's a few pages. I tried to make it where you don't have to take too many notes. So a lot of the definitions, a lot of the big things that we're talking about are going to be in those couple of pages of content. But we'll also have a few activities that we're going to do together as a group each week. And then I've got some action steps, some things that you'll be able to take with you and use over the next week or so. So this idea, this is what I mentioned earlier, your ideas about parenting started back when you were parented. From the very first moments, from the very first minutes of life, we come into the world looking for someone who's looking back for us. And how that played out in those moments and every moment up until now impact how we view relationship. What do we do when we feel stressed, when we feel lonely, when we feel angry? Where do we go to when we need help? All of those things are impacted by every relationship, starting with the very first ones. Now, we're going to start off with an activity here. This is called the Tree of Life. They're on page 7. And what I'd like for you to do is take just a couple of minutes here. And we're going to look at your leaves, and we're going to look at your roots. I'd like for you to start off with your roots. So your roots are everything that's happened that's been meaningful in your life in those earliest years. Think back to early childhood. Think back to elementary school years, those formidable years of your life, and jot down a few of the big pieces here. So this may be like, who your parents were, who your best friend was, if you had a significant trauma back then, if your dad split when you were 4, if your mom had mental illness, if you had a coach who really believed in you and told you you were special, or if you were really gifted in a certain area. I want you to just take a couple of minutes here, and if you're with someone that you co-parent with, you guys talk about this. Take a few minutes and just talk about what are your roots? What are those big significant people, events, traumas, tragedies, and triumphs, any of those things that happened in those formidable years of your life. So take just a minute and write those down. What I'd like for you to do is take a few minutes and write down some things on your leaves. So this is your here and now. This is, what are your relationships like now? Who's your best friend? What are your hobbies? What do you do for work? What are your passions? And if you're fostering, that should be up there. If you've adopted, that should be up there. Your values, things that get you moving, things that are important to you. Take a few minutes and just write down a few of those things. Okay. I'm guessing that some of you probably noticed some connections. Some things from your roots that impact your leaves. Some things that happened early in your life that impact who you are right now. It's important for us to take notice of our roots. A lot of times, where are the roots on the tree? They're under the ground, right? We don't see them, but they're foundational. They mean everything to the tree. And the thing about roots is you can't get rid of them. They are there. The things that have happened in the past happened, and that's part of who we are. It always will be. And those roots are the things that filter up into what we are now and who we are now and what we do now. So what you're doing as a parent has some things from your roots that have to do with it right now. Now, the good news is even though we can't get rid of our roots, we can always grow new ones. Trees that are healthy, they're constantly putting out new roots. So like even taking the time to be here tonight and taking some opportunity to do some self-learning and some growth is growing new roots. And sometimes those leaves, those old behaviors and those old things, they kind of wither up and they fall off. Some of those things that maybe we don't like so much, through growing some new roots, we sprout some new leaves, some new things about ourselves, some new ways of doing things that can be super helpful, right? So paying attention to our roots is important. Paying attention to our leaves and what's happening right now is super important as well. So I'm going to take it one step further with this, and we're going to go ahead and do the next activity on that page there. We're going to get a little bit more specific. So as we start talking about your attachment style and your relationship style, these are some questions that are going to get you started thinking about your own upbringing. So these are things that have to do with how you were parented. So take another minute or two and write down even just one word in each of these categories, or a couple of words if something comes up. So what were feelings like in your household? Were feelings allowed as you were growing up? Were feelings big? Were feelings small? What was communication like in your household growing up? Was it really loud? Was it really quiet? Was there healthy touch in your household? Were needs met? And what was the discipline style like in your household growing up? So take just a minute. Think back on when you were parented. What was the atmosphere like in your home? All right, so all of these things impact how you view relationship right now. Specifically, the thing around were needs met for you. When you had a felt need, starting in those first hours of life, was that need met or not? And as you reached out for help from people around you all throughout your life, it let you know what relationship meant and how you view relationship. So there's been a lot of research on this, and I'm going to show you another video now that's going to kind of walk you through what the experts have developed in terms of attachment theory and attachment styles. So there are four main ways of doing relationship, of doing this attachment thing. So as we're looking through this video, look for some of these words: secure attachment, avoidant or dismissive attachment, anxious attachment, and fearful, disorganized attachment. You're going to find out what all of those things are. And what I'd like for you to do is start thinking about which one of these fits you best as we're watching this video. And here's the deal. Again, none of you asked for your attachment style. You didn't ask for your parents or how you were raised. It's something that happened to you. So there's no shame about how we do relationship. There's no shame or guilt around, well, I'm this way or I'm that way. Most of us just have a way that we tend to do relationship. Sometimes when we're under stress, we lean certain ways or lean other ways. With certain people where we feel really safe, we might look one way or another way. So all of us are going to have a little bit of all of these. But I want you to kind of pay attention. Is there something that you notice that sticks out to you that says, ooh, this is where I tend to go. This is what feels like kind of who I am. So we'll watch this video and see if you can figure out what's going on for you.
The attachment theory argues that a strong emotional and physical bond to one primary caregiver in our first years of life is critical to our development. If our bonding is strong and we are securely attached, then we feel safe to explore the world. We know that there is always that safe base, which we can return to any time. If our bond is weak, we feel insecurely attached. We are afraid to leave or explore a rather scary-looking world because we are not sure if we can return. People who are securely attached are said to have greater trust, can connect to others, and as a result are more successful in life. Insecurely attached people tend to mistrust others, lack social skills, and have problems forming relationships. There is one type of secure attachment, and there are three types of insecure attachments: anxious ambivalent, anxious avoidant, and anxious disorganized. In responses to distress, the first three react organized, while the last acts disorganized. To understand the theory better, let's look at Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who have 4 children: Luca, Anne, Joe, and Amy. The Smiths are lovely parents who cuddle, make frequent eye contact, speak warmly, and are always there for their kids. But one day, Mr. Smith falls very sick and dies. For Mrs. Smith, life now becomes very difficult. She spends all day working, while at the same time trying to care for her children. An impossible task. At 6 years of age, Luca's brain is for the most part developed, his character strong and his worldview shaped. The new situation does not affect him much. He knows there is still always Mum, his safe haven. He feels securely attached. Later, he turns into a trusting and optimistic young man. His self-image is positive. Anne, who is 3, has problems coping with the new lack of attention. To Anne, her mother now acts unpredictably. She is anxious about their relationship and as a result becomes clingy. To get her mum's attention, she has to raise her emotional state and scream. When her mum finally reacts with a predictable response, she herself acts ambivalent and doesn't show her true feelings. Later in life, others think Anne is unpredictable or moody. Her self-image is less positive. Her attachment style is anxious ambivalent. 2-year-old Joe spends his days with his uncle, who loves him, but thinks that a good education means being strict. If little Joe shows too much emotion or is too loud, his uncle gets angry and sometimes punitive. This scares Joe. He learns that to avoid fear, he has to avoid showing his feelings, also in other situations. As an adult, he continues this strategy and has problems entering relationships. His image of himself is rather negative. His attachment is anxious avoidant. Amy, who is just 1 year old, gets sent to a nursery. The staff there is poorly trained, overworked, and often very stressed. Some are outright abusive. Amy therefore becomes anxious of the very people she seeks security from, a conflict which totally disorganizes her ideas about love and safety. As she is experiencing fear without resolution, she tries to avoid all social situations. As an adult, she thinks of herself as unworthy of love. Her self-image is very negative. Her attachment is anxious disorganized. Our attachment is formed in the very first years of our lives, a time when we are too young to communicate our anxiety and as a result can experience high levels of stress. Then our adrenal gland, an organ sitting on top of our kidneys, produces the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol. The heart rate increases, the blood pressure goes up, and we become alert. If that happens frequently, it is called toxic stress. Toxic because it impairs the development of a child's brain and weakens the immune system. In embryos or at a very young age, toxic stress can even switch the expressions of genes, which can affect our health many decades later. By simulating a strange situation, we can assess an attachment style already by the age of 1. To do this, we let the child play with their mother for a few minutes inside a room. Then the child is left alone. The key moment is the child's reaction when her mother returns. Securely attached children first usually hug their mother, then can calm down and eventually get back to playing. Insecurely attached children can be ambivalent and avoidant. Some can't stop crying or refuse to continue playing. The long-term effects of our attachment in the early years are well documented. Using the theory, researchers at Minnesota University were able to predict already at age 3 if a child would drop out of high school with 77% accuracy. In another study, undergraduates at Harvard were asked to assess how close they felt to their parents. 35 years later, they were asked about their health. 91% of those who said they had a rather broken relationship with their mother were also diagnosed with health issues, including coronary artery disease, hypertension, and alcoholism. For those that had reported a warm relationship, the figure of poor health diagnosis was just 45%. But there is another reason why the early years deserve special attention. They are the starting place for subsequent behaviors. A kid that feels securely attached at age 2 can make friends at kindergarten. Their worldview gets reinforced with every interaction and they develop optimism. As a result, they make good relationships at school, then at college, and later at work. Highly insecurely attached children can miss out on this opportunity. Psychologist John Bowlby, a pioneer in attachment theory, allegedly said, "What cannot be communicated to the mother cannot be communicated to the self." In other words, those who feel insecurely attached might not quite understand themselves. To get to know who they are and what they feel, they might have to go way back in time.
All right. So it's kind of a bad news, good news thing here, right? But the most important thing is that these early relationships matter a lot. And if we just kind of say that's in the past, that's my roots, it's under the ground, I'm not going to pay a whole lot of attention to it, we see that doesn't always work out so well. And the good news is that you can build strong attachments all throughout the lifespan. However, being aware of those earliest relationships is super important. So just a little bit of a review here. So what has life taught you about relationships? Where do you go when you need something? So for everyone in here, this started when you were an infant with a felt need. First moments of life, you get this bad feeling here, right? You don't have words, you don't have anything but your cry to express that need. And hopefully there's someone else out there to hear that cry. When a baby feels that bad feeling here and they cry out and someone swoops them up in their arms and cares for them and cradles them and gives them that food that helps that bad feeling in the tummy go away, they have completed an attachment cycle. A child felt a need, they expressed the need, someone was there to hear the need and respond to it well. Every time that happened for you, that helped build security in your attachment. And it started teaching you some things. I am seen. I am heard. I am safe. I'm cared for. I'm gonna be okay. And it starts teaching you some things about what relationships are. Every time you have an attachment cycle completed, it teaches you relationships are predictable. You can count on them. That's where you go when you feel the need. Now, it started when you were a baby, but then as you got older, into your elementary school years, you expressed different needs, and were there people there to care for you then? Then through your adolescence and the teen years, that looks a little different too. Those expressions of needs. Were people there to care for you? Did you learn something about relationship? Was it secure? Was it safe? Did you feel loved, cared for, and understood? Now, when that doesn't happen, this is the roots of avoidance, anxiety, and fear. So when a baby expresses a need and nothing happens, there's no one there. They've expressed a need and they've learned something. When I express a need, I cannot count on someone to be there to take care of that need. And they've learned something about reaching out for others. That when they have felt needs, even babies sometimes learn it's not even worth expressing it. Why do it? And some babies actually lose their voice. They stop crying because they've learned it doesn't matter. There's no one there to hear. Now think about that through the lifespan. When you reach out to others and there's no one there, who do you start trusting? Who do you start relying on? Yourself, right? You learn relationships are not predictable. They're not safe. You can't count on them. If I need anything done, I'm going to count on myself. And again, this is not something that anyone asked for, but think about that. Is that something that you feel sometimes? Do you feel avoidant or dismissive in your relationships with others? Do you feel like it's easier to trust yourself than other people? Now, say this, avoidant, dismissive attachment styles, they're very predictable and very stable. You can kind of guess what people are going to do. And there are a lot of very, very successful people who have avoidant and dismissive attachment styles. who have learned to take care of themselves, and they become very successful in most areas except for what? Relationship, right? That's hard because you got to be a little vulnerable. You got to trust. Now, sometimes in the infancy, you've learned that you've got to just keep on crying, keep on begging, keep on, you have to be really loud or else no one's going to hear you. And this is the roots of like that anxiety in your attachment style. You've learned that no one will care for me unless I'm the squeaky wheel, unless I'm loud and I bug them to death until they do what I need. They've learned that they can't take care of themselves. They have no security in themselves. All their security is in other people. Again, very predictable. There are people who are fine people who are anxiously attached. Knowing it is helpful. Now, if you've expressed a need starting in infancy and you received pain, these are the roots of that complex trauma, that relational trauma, that you've reached out for the very people who are supposed to be there to care for you and nurture you, and you become hurt and fearful. You've learned relationships mean pain. It doesn't feel good to be far away because that doesn't feel very safe. So you go close, and then when you get close, that doesn't feel safe either because the last time you got close, what happened? You got hurt. So this fearful, disorganized, it's very tough to walk in the world with a fearful, disorganized attachment style because you try to do the right things and you get hurt for it. Then you do the wrong things and sometimes you get rewarded for it. So things are just kind of moving all the time and it's hard to know how to relate to and who to relate to. So we have a little metaphor that we use, thinking about every time you've done that attachment cycle, think about that as like getting a marble in your bag. You got a bag of attachment here, right? So think about how many marbles you would have in your bag. How many times were people there for you? You expressed a need and they cared for you. Now, secure people, they kind of walk in the world thinking that they move towards self-assurance and relationship. They've got enough security that says, I can count on myself and I can count on other people. I can give help and I can receive help because I believe that I've got 100 marbles and I believe that pretty much everyone else does too, right? So they're okay to give help, they're okay to receive help because that's what they believe. Anxious folks feel like they don't have any marbles, right? They don't have any security within their bag, so what are they going to do? They're going to reach for other people's marbles, right? They're going to try to get all of your marbles, and they're going to do anything they can to try to get them, right? They need, and you're the one that's there to fill that need for them. Now, our avoidant people, they move away from relationships under stress. They feel like, I've got my own marbles, that's all I need. I don't believe that anyone else has any marbles. They may not. I'm not going to count on it anyway. I'm going to take care of myself, and that's just kind of what I'm going to do. And our fearful, disorganized folks, it's like, what are marbles, right? I don't even know what it is. Sometimes they get a marble, sometimes they don't. They feel like the marbles are always moving. And sometimes when you even try to give them a marble, they start to feel scared and they don't know why. Something about getting close to a person who's secure can sometimes feel very unsafe for a person with that insecure, fearful and disorganized attachment style. Now again, the good news is we all start somewhere, but we typically don't end there. So your childhood is good to pay attention to, but think about those other people in your life, other people that you've learned security from. No matter how old you are, every time you express a need and someone is there to hear that, that's like getting one more marble in your bag. And some of us have had horrific childhoods, a lot of fear, a lot of disorganization, a lot of anxiety, a lot of avoidance. And we find that person who gets us and understands us. And sometimes we have to kind of borrow their security while we're building ours up. All right? Now think about this with your kiddos. You've got marbles. They may be trying to get them. They may not want them. They may not know what they want sometimes. But knowing how you tend to do relationship is going to help you interact best with your kiddo. So So what? How does this matter? With your children, I want you to think about with me, if you drop your kids off for childcare tonight, this is going to get really real right now. And I want to think about how attachment styles might impact something as simple as dropping off your kids at childcare, or dropping off your kids at school for the first day, or at summer camp, or having sleepovers, or dealing with the school district, or the therapist, or the caseworker. All of that stuff is going to kick up our attachment stuff. So paying attention to it's really important. So I want you to think about this. So let's think about, you've got your kiddo, and you're walking them down the hallway to drop them off at childcare. Your child gets close to the door, and they see someone that they know. And they run to that person, and they give them a big hug, and they start playing. Now let's say that they're playing for a little bit, things are going pretty well, and you kind of notice out of the corner of your eye that they kind of take a little tumble and fall, and they maybe skin their knee up a little bit. So that's the scenario. You've taken your kid, dropped them off, they see a friend, they run to them, and they have a little spill. So for our securely attached folks, they're going to be present in their thoughts about attachment activities and their memories. They're going to be okay with the fact that, hey, sometimes it's hard to drop off my kids, but I'm going to get through this. I'm all right. I may need some help, and I'm okay to ask for help. Right? Someone else may need some help dropping off their kid. I'm okay to give them some help too. I can take help. I can give help. And it's okay for the kid to be independent. As the child runs to go meet their friend, they're thinking, awesome, how cool. They know somebody. How neat is that they have a friend here? So they're fine with the kid running off to meet that friend, right? And then when the kid tumbles and hurts their knee, what do? They're that safe home base, right? They swoop them up and they say, oh, wow, let's get some Band-Aids on that. Let's take care of this. They can allow their child to go and explore, and they can allow their child to come back when their child has a need. That's what secure attachment looks like in a parent. But sometimes even securely attached parents need something. And sometimes they send accidental messages to their kiddos. The accidental message could be, I'm okay, you're okay, everything is fine, life is grand, let's just have fun. When you're dealing with a kid who has insecure attachment, this can overlook their story. Just because you have security does not mean your child has security. They may do a relationship radically different than you do. So what you may need to do is be present with the hurt and the pain. When your child is experiencing, when they're having a meltdown because separation is hard or they just don't want to be around you, you're able to pull into your security and say, I'm okay here. I'm not going to take offense when my kid does relationship different than me. If they're clingy, you're going to be okay. If they jet off, you're going to be okay. But you're going to honor their story, and you're going to use your security as kind of like a superpower, right? You've got all of those marbles to give those kiddos. You're going to avoid feeling offended, and you're going to let your child borrow your security. You're going to let them know, I'm here. I'm here if you need me. I'm okay for you to go and play, but just so you know, I'm right here, and we're going to be all right. That's what security looks like. Avoidant or dismissive parents. What this might look like is maybe you get right in the front door, and you say, oh, there's the childcare. Off. Go ahead. See ya. Give them a little nudge, and off they go. Because avoidant adults value independence, right? And they might accidentally push that independence onto the kiddo. And so when they see the kid, run off and meet their friend, they're thinking, okay, I'm done. They're doing their thing, I'm doing my thing, I'm off. And when the child falls and skins their knee, they might accidentally do what they would want, which is promote toughness. I'm okay. Just dry your eyes and deal with this. Because that's what they would want. They don't want anyone messing with them when they're having a hard time. They've learned that they just trust themselves. When what the child may need is something radically different. So the accidental message that might be sent is that distance is better. Independence is better. Neediness means weakness. And we might accidentally promote some of those old patterns that our kids have experienced where they weren't able to trust in the adults. What they need is for an adult to understand, I'm doing that dismissive thing. This is that thing that I do where I sometimes like distance a whole lot, but my kiddo needs me right now. So I'm going to step over that dismissiveness and I'm going to be present with my kiddo. I'm going to be present in the feeling, present with them where they are, and I might do things a little bit different than what I would want or what I might need. So they need to be aware of their dismissive tendencies and become more comfortable with the culture that promotes trust and expression of need. So if you are primarily dismissive, it may be a learning curve when you're dealing with a kid who's not. And a kiddo who comes from a hard place and has experienced trauma is going to maybe need you to be a little bit more present with them. So our anxiously attached folks, boy, that kid's knee is not even going to hit the ground. They're going to be hovering, and they might walk with the kid into the childcare place. They might say, I'm just probably going to hang out for a little bit. I'm just going to stay because I'm not sure they're going to be okay, and they need me here. And when that child sees the friend and runs off, an anxiously attached person might feel the tendency to feel offended. Oh, wait a minute. What about all I've done for them? What about all the things I've done for them today and this week? And how dare they just run off and play with their friends? Don't they need me? I'm their parent, right? When what the child may need is some healthy independence, some healthy detachment. To be able to run off and see a friend is normal and it's healthy and it's functional. So being aware of that anxious tendency, and if they do skin the knee, look out. The anxious parent's just going to swoop around and you're not going to get close. This is that idea of kind of the helicopter parent, right? And it's a fine balance because some of our kids need a lot of our attention. They might need a whole lot. But we have to be careful that it's the child's need and not our own need that's being met. Because the accidental message here may be that it's the child's job to make sure the parent is happy and emotionally secure. So we might unintentionally reinforce patterns of parentification in kids. Right? All of me is wrapped up in you. And that can be tough for a kid to hold on to. So the needs for anxiously attached parents are to recognize the anxious states and learn how to self-soothe. You might need to do your butterfly hug. You might need to do some self-talk and even recognizing, I'm doing that anxious thing. We're taking the kids to the park and I'm all in their business and what they want to do is kind of run and play. And we might see the need to step over our anxious attachment and allow our kids some space to do some of that natural separation. And we can still be that home base for them to come back to. We're not going to have so much distance that we say, get out of here. We're going to say, I'm here for you. Now, parents, you're fostering and you have your own stuff, which a lot of us do. A lot of us have our own trauma, our own negative experiences. And for some of us, that's a root on the tree that helped motivate us to even care for kids who've experienced trauma. You know what it feels like. You know what it feels like to be alone and to need someone. You know what it feels like to be hurt by the people who are close to you. And for some of us, that's been part of our motivation in caring for kids who experience trauma. So, however, it's still something we need to pay attention to. Now, for parents who are dropping their kids off at childcare, who have their own trauma, their own history, they might be dissociating a little bit, right? They might be reliving some of their own stuff that's happened. They might be thinking, I'm back at that spot where I got dropped off and something bad happened, and it can be really tough to be present with our kids when we're dissociating and when we're back kind of reliving our own traumas. And not to say, that fearful and disorganization and part of our history would disqualify you from caring for kids with trauma. For some kids, it's like the best thing ever because you've got that empathy and you know and you understand. You just got to be aware of your own stuff. So the accidental message may be that my adults don't feel safe with me. And they might recognize that glazed look that we get sometimes. And as you're supposed to be dropping the kids off, and you're kind of just not really present. Kids, especially trauma kids, can pick up on that. So what we might need to do is learn some self-awareness, some strategies to recognize your own triggers. Recognize, I'm doing that thing. I'm back in my trauma right now, and I'm going to honor that it's here, and I'm going to let it go as I pull my attention back to being present with my kid. We may need to do some self-work, some work around your own trauma, some therapy and some skills around distress tolerance and the ability to cope with some of the trauma that we're experiencing in that moment. All right? Any questions so far on attachment styles, how we do relationship? Okay, I'm going to kind of wrap up here with a story. It's a true story. Yes?
Are we still doing questions?
Sure.
Okay, so I just wanted to maybe expound on the secure attachment,
Yes.
how that plays into like being naive.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're secure, you can be
Sure.
taken advantage of.
Yeah.
I think that's what leads into the other attachments, but maybe a skill set or just a general understanding of how to retain security.
Yeah. So Joseph's question was is it possible that secure attachment can allow us to be a little bit naive, thinking all is fine in the world? And yeah, that's true. And that's, I think, especially, that's part of why being trauma-informed is really important. Understanding that, everyone has a little bit different story. And if yours was just fine, understanding that your kids may not be, or your partners may not be, or your neighbor. Understanding that helps with the awareness so that, you can kind of predict maybe some things may be happening differently. So story. This is a true story, and a man who actually came to TIPS just this past year, and he told me I could share the story because it's a really, really good one. And this is an example of how being aware of your attachment style can be absolutely empowering in your relationship with your kid. So this guy, I'm going to call him Bill. It's not his real name, but Bill came to me and said, Corey, we're doing this work around attachment styles, and I've recognized I'm absolutely avoidant. I'm dismissive. And I recognized that I grew up with a stepdad who was really, really stern and gave a lot of rules and was really hard on me, and I learned that I couldn't really go to him, especially when I was feeling things. I learned to kind of shut off those feelings, and I'm pretty good at it. I know how this works. However, I'm trying to do something a little different. And I'm trying to recognize that avoidance and do things different with my kids. And he told me the story about his oldest son in his household. And they're a blended family, have a lot of kids in the home, and the family dog nipped at one of the younger kids. And Dad said, "That's it, we can't have it, we're getting rid of the dog." And he noticed his oldest son start to have some feelings and start to kind of just crumble and go over and sit on the couch. And he said, "Corey, I recognized my first instinct was just to let him be. Tell him to toughen up, life's hard, deal with it. Because that's what I experienced. And that's what I kind of expected. But what I did was I stepped over my dismissive attachment style, and I realized my kid needed some connection. He needed me. So what I did was I went and just sat next to him, and I said, 'You look sad, what's up?' 'You look sad, what's up?' 5 words. And he said that his son just melted into his arms. And he said, 'Dad, that dog is all that we had left from our old life. Back when you and Mom were together, and everything's changed. And that dog is the only thing that I have left.' And he said that that's all he really needed to say. That recognizing his style of doing attachment was different than what his kid needed in that moment. and being able to recognize it, step over it, be present with this kid. And he said that he was like, his kid was just glued to his side for the rest of the week, and they had this really strong connection. And he said that it was this beautiful thing, and they actually even decided that, I think we'll keep the dog. This really means a lot to you. We're going to figure out how to make this work. Now, I want to tell you something. This story could have ended so differently, so easily, if he would have just done the bike the way that it always went. He would have done that dismissive thing. And it could have been that they were talking about this 20 years later in therapy and saying, man, back when you got rid of my dog, that started all of this anger and hatred. But instead, this kid's got a different story. This kid is learning secure attachment. He's learning when I express needs, who's there to pay attention, who hears me, and who is putting this into action. That's what it looks like. And honestly, it doesn't take a whole lot. It takes doing some self-work. And these are the action steps that I'm going to encourage you to do. Now, first of all, there's a series of questions on page 8 and 10. This comes from Dr. Dan Siegel's book, Brainstorm, about attachment and relationships with adolescents. When I've heard Dr. Siegel speak, he says that this is one of the most powerful things you can do in your relationship with your kids to help raise securely attached kids, is do the work. Pay attention to what your story is. Pay attention to what your history is. So I've given you 2 pages of questions. If a person that's living by yourself, just spend some time, or have a friend over and you guys talk about this over coffee or tea. If you're co-parenting, talk with your spouse, talk with your partner. Just spend some time. This is the kind of thing that you would spend hundreds of dollars to do if you went and had a psychologist or a psychiatrist do. You don't have to do that. I mean, you might want to, but you don't have to. These are some great questions to just do some self-work. Think about your past. Think about your history. Think about your present. And the last thing is that part 2 of this is just some personal journaling reflections. Some things to do over the next week to really think about your attachment styles and how it impacts the kids that you care for. And what I would love is if you guys did this homework and brought it back next week. No, homework. I promised I wouldn't use that word. These are action steps, not homework. Right. So when you do your action steps, if you have them, bring them back. These are things that would be awesome to talk about that first 15 minutes of class from 6:15 to 6:30. So if you've got some things that have come up for you, we'd love for you to share those with us and be able to dig in a little bit deeper during those times. So to wrap up, final thoughts: spend time with people in your life who contribute to your positive attachment. Friends, partners, spouses, brothers and sisters, support groups, whoever it is that contributes to your attachment, be intentional. The more time you're spending with people who pour into you, the more secure you're going to feel and the better off things are going to be. Remember your motivation. You may be building positive attachment narratives for the next generation, for the kids who are living with you. Continue working through security. And also, finally, just everyone has an attachment style. No one was able to choose their own upbringing. So be kind to yourself and curious about how your attachment style works. Express some loving kindness to yourself. You didn't ask for it, but be curious. What is it? And how is it impacting how you do relationship and how you care for those really special kiddos who are right over there waiting for you? Right?